Hi, everyone, and welcome to Live with the 19th. I'm Emily Ramshaw, co-founder and CEO of the 19th, an independent nonprofit newsroom that aims to empower you with the information, resources, and community you need to be equal participants in our democracy. In honor of National Women's Small Business Month, the 19th is gathering entrepreneurs and business leaders to have meaningful conversations about the challenges and opportunities for women and LGBTQ+ people in business. Before we get started, we'd like to thank our sponsor, MasterCard. Linda Kirkpatrick, President of North America for MasterCard, will share a few words.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Linda Kirkpatrick, and I lead MasterCard's business in North America. I'm honored to join you for this important conversation in honor of National Women's Small Business Month. Small businesses are the backbone of their communities. In the United States, 99% of all businesses are small businesses, and they employ 50% of the workforce. Women entrepreneurs in particular play a critical role. They contribute more than $3 trillion to today's economy and open businesses at twice the rate of men. The pandemic had an outsized impact on these businesses, right when they were needed the most. That's why last year, MasterCard committed $250 million to support small businesses. As part of this commitment, we are providing entrepreneurs with cybersecurity tools to protect their businesses, as well as access to data and insights to help them better understand and service their customers. In addition, MasterCard's Digital Doors program is providing tools for U.S. female entrepreneurs to more seamlessly digitize their sales and take their businesses to the next level. And we're connecting female entrepreneurs with mentors, partners, financing, communities, and opportunities for growth across the world. We also recognize that women of color face unique challenges, with half of all Black Americans excluded from the financial mainstream and Black-owned small businesses blocked from funding. We're tackling this problem head-on by committing $500 million to help close the racial wealth and opportunity gap for Black communities and businesses. Through our Strivers initiative, we're partnering with Black-owned venture capital firms to invest in women of color with the help of the award-winning and fabulous Jennifer Hudson. At MasterCard, we believe in equitable, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth for all. Our world is full of incredible possibility. Ensuring these opportunities are available to everyone is our priority. We continue to seek to find ways to support today's women and create a better tomorrow for the girls who are our future leaders. By 2025, we will have brought 50 million small and medium-sized businesses into the digital economy and helped 25 million female entrepreneurs grow their businesses. We're proud to partner with the 19th as we celebrate Women's Small Business Month and have important conversations that drive change and empower women in small businesses to make their mark. Thank you.
A quick reminder that while sponsors and donors help to keep Live with the 19th free for viewers to attend, they play no part in the programming of our events. As our conversation kicks off, we hope you'll share what resonates with you on social media using the hashtag 19thlive. And if you haven't yet subscribed to our free newsletter, you can do that at 19thnews.org/subscribe. You can find out about upcoming 19th News events, read our journalism, and more. Our first conversation of the day is with Isabella Casillas Guzman, the 27th Administrator of the U.S. Small Business Administration, which represents more than 30 million small businesses. Previously, she served as the agency's Deputy Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor during the Obama-Biden administration. Chabeli Carrazana, the 19th Economy Reporter, will be leading this conversation. Chabeli?
Well, thank you so much, Emily. And thank you, Administrator. It's so great to have you here with us today.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So if you don't mind, I wanted to jump right in. There's a lot we could talk about, but I really want to begin, with sort of the biggest program coming out of the SBA in the past year and a half in the pandemic, the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP. This is the forgivable loan program that was available to businesses to keep them open, to keep workers employed throughout the pandemic. It's also a program that has changed significantly from its initial iteration. So, there were a lot of significant criticisms of PPP when it initially was rolled out. We know that a lot of folks in communities where in communities of color were not able to access the funds fully. We know that a lot of large corporations, hundreds, were able to access the maximum amount, the $10 million maximum amount available. A lot of women-owned businesses were shut out of access from that program. Now, I know you weren't administrator yet at that point, but I know that PPP has been a huge part of the time that you've spent so far in this role. I was hoping you could take us back and sort of give us some insight on what went wrong there. What were some of the safeguards that were missing that ultimately led to a lot of communities of color not having the access to these funds that would have really helped them in those initial rounds?
Well, great. I mean, I think that it is such a critical program, so I appreciate, the opportunity to talk more about it. I was in California at the time, leading on small businesses and innovative startups, and from the state's perspective, we were really trying hard to make sure all businesses could access this program. And I think what's really important to point out is that this was a creative program that was looking for a home and a distribution network. And the SBA, of course, has one of the longest standing strong public-private partnerships with all of the lenders who participate in SBA core loans. And so that's where the Paycheck Protection Program landed. But I think obviously we knew from before the pandemic and know even more intensely now that there are systemic barriers and challenges that people of color face in accessing capital and participating in the capital markets and engaging with financial institutions. And so I think we saw that play out above all during the Paycheck Protection Program. Our small businesses, not all of them have those great banking relationships, and even if they do, just navigating programs like this are complex. And obviously there was so much going on for so many businesses and trying to understand, how to access this program and what fit for them and how could they calculate what they needed, et cetera. And so, I think all of that really speaks to the need, and something that President Biden and I talked about. One of the first things we talked about, actually, and that was that our small businesses need better connections and folks to help them navigate federal resources. And so within the American Rescue Plan, the Community Navigator pilot program was born to really try to help solve for some of those systemic challenges of connection that limited people from accessing PPP. In addition to that, I mean, this was an evolving program, but what we really were proud of in 2021 is that we made some really key changes and changed our strategy in terms of implementation and outreach so that we could overcompensate and actually reach out to those underserved communities. In fact, we just recently were pleased to see that the GAO audit acknowledged the fact that the administration was able to reach out to more of those underserved populations, those smaller entities, people of color and others that were able to access the program better with some of the changes made for sole proprietors, for example, and for the outreach that we did through community financial institutions, those more mission lenders or minority depository institutions that are serving these communities so well. So I think it's really just about connection and the networks that we establish for our small businesses to make sure we help them.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the Community Navigator program because I do want to ask you about that a little later, but I wanted to get into some of the details of what you just talked about, some of those changes that came into the PPP program later during this year. We saw the race and gender question move its place in the application. Like you mentioned, there was aid for sole proprietors, many of whom are women, majority, I think. We also saw changes for undocumented folks who wanted to apply to receive those loans. So there was a number of things that changed quite significantly. And to your point about the GAO report sort of talks about how that really helped that access that we're talking about. So I was hoping you could take me inside some of those specific changes, how you worked through what needed to be done to reach these communities and what that process was like, because I'm sure, I know you hit the ground running as soon as you joined the SBA this year with many of those changes.
Yes, and well, the Biden-Harris administration obviously it came in with a strong commitment to equity, and for our small businesses, that's highly critical because there's some market inefficiencies. Not all of our businesses can have access to as much opportunity because they can't have the capital to grow, and so we really wanted to make sure that was solved. The Biden-Harris administration in early March made that significant change to sole proprietors, which I think was a game changer because we are disproportionately represented women and people of color amongst sole proprietors because we can't reach those revenue thresholds or job creation levels of many of the peer businesses because of the lack of investment in capital. And so by making that rule change, what the SBA did was allow for PPP loans to be calculated based on gross income instead of profit. And for sole proprietors, of course, that was really key, that was critical, so that they could then access the PPP and position their businesses to survive during the pandemic. And I've traveled the country and have spoken to so many different businesses in various industries, and that PPP was a lifesaver. So many of them didn't know what to do at that point, and were looking we were at their last stage of not knowing what the future would hold, and with the PPP they were able to keep their employees on board or cover some key expenses for their businesses. So that was really a critical change. The other thing, though, I think that was really important was the extensive outreach. Obviously, there was a large commitment to making sure that our community financial institutions, especially when you look at the CDFIs, the community CDFIs, the community development financial institutions, they were able to access PPP and be the first to be able to distribute it to their underbanked, underrepresented networks of businesses. And so with that extensive outreach, with the right distribution channels and with the right program design elements, we could better serve our smallest businesses and our women and people of color and veterans and others that were not able to access it in the earlier rounds.
One thing that we heard over the past year and a half as we talked to business owners about this process was that PPP, what happened, particularly in the initial rounds, was sort of reflective of some of the sort of larger systemic issues that you were talking about earlier, where communities of color, marginalized communities have felt like an afterthought in these programs, have felt like perhaps they were too cumbersome for them to navigate. And that leads to folks choosing not to apply for aid. It leads to them not wanting to list their race or gender in an application, for example, because they might feel that that could hinder their access to financial capital. And so I'm really curious about how you're working through that now to build trust in these communities so that they have confidence that these SBA programs that you all are working on and putting forth will actually be able to reach those who we know are really the businesses that are most in need of this help.
That's right. And I think, what's important to note is that our approach has been that we have to look at the design and meet our businesses where they are. And why that's so important and why I say it so much to my team is because, if we're going to be customer centric and really think about who we're serving, like who is that customer, that we need to recognize that there's been a changing face of entrepreneurship and more women and people of color are starting businesses at high rates. And how are we meeting them with our offerings? Does it fit their situation? And especially post-COVID, businesses have taken on more debt to survive, and they look quite different operationally than they did before. And so I've challenged my team to look at all of our programs and in the design as well as the implementation strategy and the outreach strategy to make sure that we're considering the entrepreneurs that are going to be the ones that are building our economy back better. And I know that that's, it sounds simple, but it's everything that's basically all the basics that we want to make sure that we include in our program design, like the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, where we wanted to make sure that we could access businesses and platforms that they already were accustomed to using, because maybe they didn't know how to get to the government. So we chose, point of sale vendors, where so many businesses were already taking those payments electronically, and were able to now use their data and apply to the restaurants program very simply. We put the Restaurant Revitalization Fund program into 2 languages on the platform, in both Spanish or English, and we translated it into over 17 other languages in addition. So we want to, it's those little things that you can build into the design of a program to make sure that it really meets businesses where they are, physically, as well as it has key design elements that make it flexible in terms of how they can use the funds and how they fit the eligibility. And so we want to make sure that we work on all our programs from that perspective as we look at the future of the SBA. And I think that's all embedded in the President's Build Back Better agenda as we look at small business investment and the key programs that are detailed. They are very creative and aggressive in trying to make sure that we're helping the underserved businesses better access resources to grow their firms. And I think that's what what we're really trying to focus on at the SBA.
You mentioned meeting businesses where they are, and that brings me back to the Community Navigators program that you mentioned earlier. I think that's a really interesting program. I believe that you're sort of now in the process of giving out those awards, or maybe you've already announced them.
Very close.
Okay. I thought it was this month. Can you give us talk to us a little bit more specifically about what the aim of that program is? We've seen so many community organizations really do the hard work of reaching people, not just for businesses, but folks throughout this past year and a half with access to that aid, and they're the ones that have been sort of really working to do that work. And so it's interesting to me that you all are pursuing a model like that. Can you tell us maybe some of the pressure points you're hoping to solve with this program?
Yes, well, I mean, I think you mentioned it earlier that it's just building trust, and I think that's really critical. I mean, I actually in my travels, I've heard from people that said they, didn't apply early to PPP because they weren't really sure if the government was going to actually forgive it, and this lack of trust and relationship with navigating federal programs or state or local programs, I think is really prevalent, especially amongst our small businesses and women and people of color. And so, making sure that they know that these programs are intended for them and that we want them to apply is really key. And so the Community Navigator pilot program concept was really to try to build local, on the ground, trusted relationships through organizations that were authentically already serving these underserved populations. And this is a great strengthening of SBA's resource network that is already powering women's business centers across the country, and small business development centers and veterans business opportunity centers and SCORE chapters. But we wanted to make sure that we had this hub and spoke, national, regional, local model of organizations who could step up our engagement with underserved communities and build trust and actually communicate in language or in a format that is relatable to these communities, to be able to help them learn about the programs at the federal level or at the state or local for that matter. And so there already are great organizations out there doing this work, and we just want to power them through this program. We will be announcing soon in October the initial community navigators who are participating in the pilot, and with these national as well as regional and local organizations, they will have the insights of how you can access the funding from federal government with grants and investments and loans, as well as how to build your revenues through federal programs, with contracting and international trade, or some of the expertise that we can offer around e-commerce. So we want to make sure that these institutions have the resources and skills, and that they can build that bridge for us, for underserved communities.
I was hoping, Administrator, you can give us a sense for what this has been looking like on the ground, examples or any stories that come to mind of outreach that you've done to businesses to build in equity to these programs and be able to really reach folks that maybe were not aware that these programs were even available to them, as you mentioned earlier. I'm wondering if there's any stories that stand out to you about maybe some personal victories or moments where you realized, we're really reaching these people that I think you've talked about since you took the post, that was really part of your goal with this position.
Yeah, I mean, I think during the Restaurant Revitalization Fund program, for example, we worked with chambers across the country, various ethnic chambers, and I remember participating in one in particular with an Asian chamber, and they just said that they were so pleased that they could have offered in multiple languages a detailed program on how to get the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, and that it was easy to use, and that it was a simple process, and that made sense to their members. And so that was really fulfilling, because that was a program that we had the opportunity to design and make sure that we were making sure that it served everybody. And I think that I love that my team has been so inspired by this approach of being customer first and technology forward and really equitable in our entire design and implementation and outreach. And, for example, we're really trying to make businesses aware of the COVID EIDL program, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, which we just increased to $2 million because we know a lot of these hard hit industries who need additional support, who have had longer terms of economic injury, need to access that disaster assistance. But we know that we want to make sure that we're serving the smallest too. And so we made sure that we simplified for 25,000 and under and had a mobile device application. So businesses that didn't have the computer and the scanner set up could just easily apply online for those small dollar loans. And so we're really pleased to be seeing people use that. And just the other day, I was on a call with a banker who said that one of his customers was able to access it really easily and get that small dollar loan, and actually on a mobile device. So I'm really thankful for the hard work that my team has been doing to try to make sure our programs are accessible.
That's great. I think there's been a lot of movement on this front, to your point, but obviously there are still a lot of really large, long time barriers ahead of women, LGBTQ plus folks, communities of color that, have really struggled for a very long time and nevertheless have been starting businesses at a rapid clip in this country, but maybe don't have the support to continue to grow those businesses. I'm wondering if you could give us a preview at all of what else you're working on to help bring down some of those barriers. Are there other things that you're thinking of that you can sort of give us a sense of what more you want to be doing, how much further you want to be pushing?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it does, come in our networks and our distribution partners. And I've been, my hope is to expand our private partnerships and so that we can really reach all these communities better and leverage some of the great, corporate platforms and distribution networks, like I mentioned before, with the technology point of sale vendors. I think this is such a unique time because everybody in the past 19 months has really been captivated by our small businesses and the struggles they've had and how they've had to pivot and adapt. And there's so much interest in trying to support them. And I think it's a unique time for the SBA to expand those networks and partners and really use them to connect with businesses. I really feel that connectivity is a huge challenge to overcome. But then, of course, in the Build Back Better agenda, SBA is included as small businesses are so important in this administration. We want to make sure that we have the tools. And oftentimes, where we see for some of these highly underserved communities is that they can't access capital to grow their businesses, and especially with small dollar loans. And so the SBA wants to have a role in making sure that we expand access to small dollar loans. And in the Build Back Better agenda, there's a commitment to do direct lending at the SBA for small dollar loans, 150,000 and under, for example. And I think across all our programs, we want to continue to commit to making sure that our design of our program fits businesses and that they can be eligible to receive these funds. And so direct lending would give the SBA the opportunity to really make an impact in the marketplace in an area that has been underserved for so long. And then, in addition, though, as we look at our revenue side of the equation, I always say the capital is one thing, but we need to give them the opportunity. Every business that I've ever talked to would rather have that revenue boost than just the loan. So they need to build their businesses, and federal contracting is such an important opportunity for our businesses, especially with the investments that we're going to be making in infrastructure and climate and beyond. So the president has made a clear commitment to making sure that we are working with our disadvantaged businesses in particular to expand federal contracting. And so SBA's role is to make sure that our businesses are contract ready, that they're able to connect to opportunities. And so that'll be a huge avenue for us to help businesses overcome those revenue gaps and opportunity gaps that they can grow to their peer size and create jobs, because that's ultimately what we want to do. And so I am excited about the opportunities on the revenue side and the capital side to really help our underserved. There's lots of partners out there who will be working with us. And I think that's what's going to be key to really making an impact and removing some of these barriers, these long-standing challenges that have held our businesses back and our economy back.
Great. You mentioned the infrastructure plan that is moving through Congress. There's another plan also moving through Congress that would enact universal, among other things, but universal paid sick leave and family leave is one of the components of that. And I wanted to ask you about that because it's timely. It's the first time that our country would have a universal program like that. And also because in talking to folks about it, some of the things that often come up is that it would be very difficult for small businesses to implement something like that, at least individually. That seems to be a tension point in particular there with universal paid leave. So I'm curious if you could tell us, A, do you support a plan like that? And B, what would that look like for the SBA? What is the SBA's role if we were to pass a national paid sick leave program?
Well, we know that workforce issues are a big challenge for our small businesses. Even health benefits in particular are always in the top 5 in terms of the challenges and expenses. So our businesses want to position themselves to compete for good workforces. And so that means they oftentimes have to have the benefits that large companies can offer. So I think that it helps small businesses compete. And I think it's a strong pathway to making sure that our future workforce is also has a level playing field across the board. We want to make sure everybody succeeds and can excel. I think that's how we build our economy back better. So I think that it'll actually help our small businesses compete in the workforce and help position them to really support their workforce. And oftentimes, these are small family-owned businesses, workers become like family, and I think that value is also there as well as small businesses being positioned to offer these resources to their employees is an advantage.
Great. Well, and finally, Administrator, I was hoping you could tell folks who might be listening, who might be a small business thinking about how they can tap into resources, what might be the best places for them to go, who to talk to, who to speak to, where can they find those resources that answer the questions of what do I need to do for my business in particular, what is beneficial for me? If you could give folks some resources.
I was born into a small business family. My dad's an entrepreneur, and I've started multiple businesses and I've worked with multiple founders. And I think what the theme that carries through is that everyone needs a team to surround them, but oftentimes our smaller businesses or our startups don't necessarily have that lawyer and accountant and consultant on speed dial. So they really need to build a team organically through the ecosystem, the network that exists already, and that the SBA funds. And so the federal government can help your business succeed with stronger outcomes if you arm yourself with a team. And so through our SBA field offices that are located throughout the country in states and territories, as well as through our resource partners, those women's business centers I mentioned, and the small business development centers, and the SCORE chapters, and soon our community navigators and our veteran centers. All of those centers can be accessed through SBA.gov. You can find local resources so that you can connect to advisors that you feel comfortable with and that can help you in training around financials, to marketing and e-commerce across the board. And I think really position your business for success. And that's what's important. So I hope that everyone recognizes that the SBA has changed dramatically over the last couple of years, scaled to deliver over $1 trillion in relief. And our mission focused team is really here to try to help you build into the future. So go to sba.gov and find your connection.
Well, Administrator, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your time on a very, very busy year. It seems like you have a lot ahead of you. And so we appreciate having you with us.
It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Administrator Casillas, Guzman, and Chabeli for that insightful conversation. For our next conversation, Nikita Patel, the 19th's Senior Director of Partnerships, leads this discussion with women who've launched and run their own small businesses. I'm pleased to introduce Amy Errett, the CEO and founder of Madison Reed, a beauty brand specializing in hair color. She's also a venture partner at True Ventures, which invests in consumer and e-commerce startups. Sana Javeri Kadri is the CEO and founder of Diaspora, a direct trade, single origin spice company dedicated to building a better spice trade. Jamie Leeds is an award-winning chef and restaurateur who opened her first restaurant, Hank's Oyster Bar, in DC in 2005. She now runs 3 under her company, the JL Restaurant Group. Over to you, Nikita.
Thanks so much. My name is Nikita and I oversee partnerships at the 19th, and I'm thrilled to be hosting this conversation today. So let's begin. Tell us about your journey towards this point in your career. How long were you working towards becoming CEO? Sanna, let's start with you.
I wasn't working towards becoming a CEO at all. I started this company as what I call kind of a strange art project of, can I build a system that is more equitable? Can I source spices that are more delicious? And I didn't even know what I would do when that question was resolved. Like when I actually did it, it was will we just shut down the project? Will we connect the farmer directly to the consumer and I'll walk away? But yeah, 5 years later, I'm kind of accidentally here as CEO and working with 150 farmers all over India and Sri Lanka.
This is my fourth company, so a little bit of a different situation in terms of a founding story. So, early in my career, investment banker, and went to get my MBA, but decided very quickly after that to be in the startup world. So I've had the good fortune of being the CEO multiple times now. So.
Yes, so I started cooking about 35-ish years ago in the early 80s, mid 80s, and didn't really know if it could lead to a career. I just fell into it. I feel very lucky. I developed a passion for cooking, and I realized that I couldn't do anything else with my life. So I was able to work myself up through the ranks, and I didn't go to culinary school. I'm a self-taught cook, and just worked from one restaurant to another and learned as much as I could in New York City is where I started, and then went to France for a year, and that's where I really got my culinary education. Did stages in different parts of France for a year, and then came back and wanted to have my own restaurant. That was like the turning point for me, and so I worked toward that. I worked for Danny Meyer at Union Square Cafe in New York City for many years, became a sous chef with him, and he mentored me. Went to work for Richard Melman in Chicago of Let Us Entertain You. Worked for Drew Neaporent out of New York City. And so I had a lot of good people to learn from, and worked my way through, and finally found myself in Washington, D.C., and was able to open my own place. We're going on 16 years now. The first Hank's Oyster Bar was 16 years ago this year, and then I've got two others. So I've got 3 Hank's Oyster Bars now.
Wow, so impressive. I love Union Square Cafe, by the way. It's one of my favorite restaurants ever. Where did you find the inspiration to create your businesses, and how did you conjure up the courage to take the big leap? Jamie?
Yeah, it was a big leap. So for me, I didn't have any money. And when I was in New York working, I wanted to open a place in Brooklyn in Park Slope. And this was before Park Slope became Park Slope. And I'd worked for the greats, but I hadn't owned my own restaurant yet. And I couldn't find money through investors. I couldn't get any money through the banks. So I wasn't able to open in Brooklyn. And I found my way to Washington, D.C. as a consultant, and realized that I would be able to open a place here. I actually just, I went for it. I put a second on my house. I cashed in my 401k. I told the landlord that I had all the money when I didn't. And I just made it happen. I was able to eventually borrow a small amount of money from a friend, and I opened the place on a dime, and then it went from there.
The business ideas have all primarily been in the consumer market, and I have a deep belief that great ideas come from consumer pain points. So we can go back and look at every single one of them. And what I've been trying to do is solve real consumer pain points. So that's the genesis of the ideas. I think the courage part is just one of those things that I think that, you know, some people are more risk takers. And, you know, often when I think back, you know, would I have done that if I had known? Maybe not. But you know, it's all worked out really well. And, you know, as businesses grow and ours has grown dramatically at Madison Reed, you have to muster up courage all the time, right? To go the next step and the next step and the next step.
Yeah. I think for me, I wasn't lasting very long at any given job. I would get bored in about 6 months. I joke that I've worked every single job in the food industry. I was a line cook for a long time. It was way too hard. So hats off to you, Jamie, for going far past a line cook. But I think over time, it felt like I was put in the world as somebody who's Indian, grew up in Mumbai, but has then, you know, built up a lot of experience in California. And there are very few things that I am uniquely suited to do. And working in Indian agriculture, but marketing it to an American audience felt like the most me thing I could possibly do, which really like capitalized on all of my strengths, which were storytelling and kind of telling stories in a deep and nuanced way. So it started with that. And yeah, it went from there. I think the reason that I kept going is that over time, I started very small. Like I started with I was still a line cook 2 days a week. I was photographing freelance on the side, and I had bought one lot of turmeric from one farmer. And I thought, hey, if I sell it to 10 chefs, like that'll be cool. And eventually, you know, I gave up one shift at the restaurant. Like I gave up the really high value Saturday brunch shift. Then I gave up another shift and kind of, you know, it went from there. And eventually I was doing it full time and we were hiring people. So it was very slow, but I also think it was very much like I had to build this company in a way that I could earn money off of it and that I could live and I could support myself and my partner. And I think without that hunger of this has to work, it probably wouldn't have, because it's kind of crazy to be importing spices from, you know, farmers all over rural India and Sri Lanka, and then exporting it out of there, importing it into here, finding ways to pack. Like when people ask me like, oh, should I get into the industry? I'm usually like, absolutely not. It's terrible. So it was just a certain hunger and desperation that made it all work by glue and hope.
What kind of obstacles have you faced along the way?
Millions. So, you know, everything from many male investors don't really understand something like hair color. And so, you know, an obstacle is very much sometimes the things that I've run or I've started haven't been obvious in the beginning. And so obstacles of just business validation, getting funding, getting investors, the right kind of investors, obstacles certainly from taking on big competitors and all of the things that go along with attempting to, you know, in our case, a L'Oreal is the big dog in this space. And so how do you have a startup and take on someone who's got billions upon billions of dollars more than you do? You know, obstacles about just lots of people saying no and not accepting that, you know, obstacles about recruiting up, you know, it just goes on and on and on. It's a lot of obstacles, but I tend to focus on the gratitude that I have for where we are. And it's amazing when you put a couple of your feet forward, you look back and you say, geez, we've come a long way. So that keeps me motivated.
Oof. I'm a very creative, kind of visual person. Spreadsheets and finance do not make sense to me. So I think the biggest one was not having the maturity and clarity that I really needed around money. And often as a woman of color, that not being encouraged, and actually people going out of their way to make sure that I didn't understand that was an assumption that I wouldn't know what it was and I shouldn't know what it was. And really having to educate myself on financial modeling and cash flow and oh, apparently there are lines of credit that banks can give you if you just know where to ask. And that you don't have to like put all of your blood, sweat, and tears into it constantly. Like a lot of that has been kind of just trial by fire in the past 5 years. I think the other one is constantly being underestimated. You know, we're the second largest single origin spice company in the US, and we're run by an all queer woman of color team that's mostly under 30. Nobody would have guessed that. Nobody gave us that shot. So I think initially it would really grate on me, and I would feel, yeah, incredibly frustrated to not be called an expert, to not be taken seriously, to be told, oh, you know, you must only know about Indian spices. And I'm like, really? But the white man from America, he knows about global spices, doesn't he? So I think, you know, initially that used to really grate on me. I think now I'm able to provide kind of sassy retorts that shut people up pretty quickly and get what I want. But it's been a long road.
Kudos to you, Sana. That's really cool. For me, I would have to say, I mean, there's so many moving parts to a restaurant, and having that all gel is a challenge, I guess. You know, for me, being in the back of the house all the time, I was very much focused, of course, on the food and all of the workings of the back of the house. So the front of the house was not a place for me. And when I first opened Hank's, the first one was a very small restaurant. It was 50 seats. I mean, we were literally shucking oysters out of an ice bin. I mean, I purposely opened it so that it would be small enough that I could do all of the different positions if I had to, if, you know, people called out or someone didn't show up for work, which happened quite a bit at the beginning. And so, you know, at one point I was expediting, working the fryer station, seating people. And there was one night I was out on the floor as a manager, and I was just like looking over at the tables, tapping my foot, wanting people to get up, like just eat and leave, you know, so that, because we had a line of people waiting, and that was just not for me. So that's the biggest challenge. And one of the servers said, Jamie, I think you should go back in the kitchen. And so yeah, I put myself back in the kitchen where I belong. So the front of the house it was a challenge to get it staffed properly and get the right people in to run the floor. And but I have, you know, over the years come to a really solid crew and a dedicated, hardworking crew that has been with me for, most of them, a very long time. So happy about that.
Mm-hmm. So Amy, your business has done really well over the course of the pandemic. What's it been like to grow so quickly when so many businesses have been sidelined over this period of time?
Well, the first thing that I always want to talk about is the humility that I feel. I would have rather our business not do well and not had a pandemic. So the first thing that I want to say is that we've had some good fortune during I'd say the first 9 to 12 months of the pandemic. I could talk about, there's clearly different stages. So saying there's one single moment in the pandemic, although, you know, our online business soared, but we had to close all stores. So there's a good example of both things happening. You know, first thing that it's been like is to really understand that all of us, including our team members and consumers, have been through trauma, right? We've been through a moment that I'm not sure any of us, no matter what age, would have ever predicted that this is where our lives in the last, you know, 18 months would be or have been. You know, it's been difficult in the sense of, you know, many people are aware of the fact that supply chain has become very, very difficult. And in the surge, we did not really run out of product, but we went through probably actions that were heroic on some level to keep our product coming. We make our products in Europe, and so that had its own set of challenges and time zones and So, I would say that it's been phenomenal from the business results standpoint. The human capital standpoint has always been challenging, still challenging. We've not reopened our HQ either, as most people haven't. And we have reopened stores, but that's been a slowly titrating state by state sort of environment. So I would say that this has been the most challenging moment that I've ever seen for any leader on so many different fronts, including the ones that are in front of us instead of behind us. So it's been very mixed in a lot of ways. We feel humble and grateful about the business outcome, but certainly very consciously trying to understand the dynamics of what does this mean about where we're at right now.
Yeah. Sana, with diaspora, you're appending one of the oldest businesses in the world, the spice trade. Can you explain your business model a bit and how you work with suppliers?
So I wrote my undergraduate thesis about colonialism and kind of its effect on Indian agriculture. And so I was keenly aware of the havoc and kind of the violence that British colonialism specifically kind of wreaked on the subcontinent, but my research was India in particular. But I think it's an important distinction to make, to say that like the spice trade has existed for thousands of years. Folks on the coast of the Malabar coast of Kerala have been actually seafaring for thousands of years. But there wasn't an inherent injustice or violence there. It was just a trade that happened. It was really when the Dutch, the British, and the French got involved, and the Portuguese got involved, that the spice trade took on the violent, really unjust connotations that we know of today, because they tweaked it to make it optimally profitable. And those profits obviously came at the expense of people, the earth, primarily people, our people. And so for me, it was, is it possible to build a system that might be more equitable? And realizing that 150 years later, the spice trade in 2016 was actually very much the same as what the British built in 1850 and then left when India became independent in 1947. Traders basically took the position that the colonizers had created, and the injustice continued, where farmers were making no money. It was a very dirty industry full of pesticide residue and fertilizer overuse. So for me, it was, can we find farmers who are growing sustainably and differently and innovatively, who are really kind of leaders of the regenerative agriculture movement in South Asia? Can we then pay them way more than they've been paid? So scratch the commodity price, scratch what the market price is, just calculate what is a price that is a living wage price for them, pay them that, and then build the rest of the business model on top of that. Like, that's our foundation. Obviously the math only made sense at a direct to consumer level. So we figured, okay, let's put up a janky website and see if some people want to buy some spices directly from us. And yeah, I think it was one step at a time. And that's why I say it was really an art project, where it wasn't about the like scale or viability or like, will we cross 1 million in year one? That was not anywhere on my radar. It was is this possible? And then the first 2 years were just proving that experiment correct, of like, oh, this is possible. Oh, people want it. And I had no money. I spent the 3K from my tax refund on the first 350 kilograms of turmeric. And from there, we've now grown, I think, like 150x, but it's just been recycling any money that we earn back into more spices. And now we have 25 spices. So I've rambled and digressed, but it's just been day by day.
That's awesome. Did you get pushback from finance or business advisors when you were building your plan?
Across the board. My first business plan was a pie chart. That's how little I knew. So I think, I remember an early conversation with a financial advisor who was very keen to sign me on, even though I didn't have any money to pay her. And she kind of went over our model, and she was like, well, if you keep it up at this rate, in 1 year, you're going to be bitter and sad and going nowhere. And I slammed the door on her and pretty much was like, you have no idea where I plan to go or what I plan to do. So I think the big one was realizing, knowing what I wasn't good at, knowing that the finance and the business was not my strong suit, but knowing that I was creative, and I could harness that and get help on the other stuff. As of last year, I have a business coach and kind of a CFO, and, a lot more structure to the company, and an operations manager who runs the company in a lot of magical ways. But yeah, until then, I don't think anybody really believed in us. The pandemic showed up, and it was our moment where we were ready with direct to consumer spices, and we grew 6x last year. So last year was, for a lot of folks, it was really devastating. For us, it was a pretty amazing time. So a lot of people take us a lot more seriously now. They did not last year. And it's funny to have those same people come crawling back and be like, I remember you.
That's good to hear. Jamie, what's the restaurant business been like over the last 2 years?
Oh my. Okay. So, nothing short of devastating. I'm not going to, paint it any other way. For us, luckily, we've been able to maintain a pretty good our business model. I established Hank's Oyster Bar in the Washington, D.C. area, like I said, 16 years ago. So when COVID hit, we had a very popular, successful brand concept that had a lot of support. We're neighborhood friendly, community driven restaurants. And, we did everything we could to pay the bills and to keep people employed. Everything that we possibly could. We opened a market. We did more takeout and delivery, considering that we're seafood and it's perishable, we never really did takeout and delivery before, but we put a whole takeout and delivery section on and built that up. I was able to keep our group together and pay everybody through the core teams from each restaurant. I was able to keep everybody on payroll. And so I was able to keep us together. And before the pandemic hit, I had 5 restaurants. Now I have 3 standing. So I did lose 2, but I'm grateful to have the 3. And my mantra through this whole thing has been, I'm grateful, but it sucks. So, it's kind of like that. But the thing that's really stood out to me is the incredible resilience and commitment of the Hanks family, and dedication, and just the stick-to-itiveness of everybody, just like getting us through this pretty much hell for a very long time, and still going through it. But I have one location that's down on the wharf, which is a beautiful complex on the river, and they are doing gangbusters. They're doing pre-COVID numbers right now. So month to month sales are better. Year over year, it's going to take some time to get back and recoup the losses. It's been a lot of negotiations with landlords. It's been a lot of negotiations with the bank, and a lot of deferred payments, and a lot of debt, and a lot of accumulation of debt. And so for me, it's just been negotiating that and working those deals. Yeah, it's been a lot. It's been a lot, but I feel very fortunate and that I have an incredible crew of people working for me. So, yeah, I see, it's hard right now with the Delta variant and the breakthrough cases. We don't know what the winter's going to be like, but we do have we built some beautiful outdoor streeteries that are going to be permanent now, which is a great thing. So it's, increased my seating by, maybe 30 to 40%. So that's been good.
Were you able to access PPP from the government throughout the pandemic?
Oh yeah, I did. Both round 1 and 2 for all the restaurants. And that's what kept me going. There's no question about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are a few mums here today, including myself, and everybody has family and friends. Is it possible to be an entrepreneur and have work-life balance? Jamie?
Yeah, there is, depending on what you define as work, what you define as balance. I have a 18-year-old son and a 4-year-old daughter. So there's, I have it on both ends, and I kind of tease and I say they both act the same. So it's kind of interesting, but yeah, so I've gotten to the point in my career where I'm able to take a step back and enjoy my family a little bit more. At the beginning of my career, I was 24/7 as an entrepreneur. I mean, even now, I'm never without my phone. It's my office is pretty much anywhere that I am can be an office. I mean, it's kind of the freedom of that mobility allows me to go anywhere and do anything, and then still be in touch with the business and keep my eye on the business. I always say cooking is the restaurant business is a young person's sport, and so I've slowly been backing out. I'm not cooking anymore. I'm off all the schedules. I'm just kind of overseeing now. I have a director of operations. I have a core management crew that, is really running the show. So, I feel like I can now take some time, but there's definitely at the beginning, my partner and son were coming into the restaurant so that we could eat together. I mean, that was the only way we would be able to have a meal together, is if they came into the restaurant. So you make it work, because as an entrepreneur, you have that entrepreneurial spirit that you just can't put out. That fire is, it's a drive. You have to go with it. And so you have to, hopefully you have a family that can recognize that and can work with you on that.
It depends on what your definition of work-life balance is. I think that when people try to explain to me that they want to have that perfect balance and be able to do all things all the time perfectly, I'd say no. Because I do think that running a company is one of those things that it's not really a part-time job, right? It's not one of those things that at Friday at 5:02, it all just stops. And then it doesn't really pick up until Monday at 7:15 a.m. But I do think you can have balance about how you have an intentional life. So the way that I like to think about it and talk about it is how to set up your life intentionally so that you actually know what you're getting into, have some boundaries about the amount of time you work, the structure of your life. I always talk about my life got a lot better when I intentionally had a certain ritual set of disciplines, things that I did that I knew that were nourishing me in a way that weren't depleting. And I think that that's the issue, is that finding that balance. It doesn't mean you're not going to work long hours. It doesn't mean there won't be conflicting things at times, but can you find those intentional things that you actually feel invigorated on a daily basis and not depleted?
Yeah. I mean, I was really young when I started Diaspora. So I think for the first 3 years, I was able to just like burn every candle, every end, every cylinder, all of the above. I didn't take weekends for a long time. I think in the middle of the pandemic is when I started taking weekends off, and I haven't gone back, where I just actually having 2 days off to turn your brain off has been life-changing. So I think I definitely hit a wall where I realized I can't do this forever. I won't be a baby forever, who can just, go and go and go. And especially realizing that there was a point where I had been running the company for 4 years and I realized I had no friendships outside of work left. Everything was a work relationship. Everything was a networking relationship. Individual friendships had just kind of gone on without me because I dropped out of them. I also, and I've been really upfront about this across the board, that the first 3 years of the business, my mental health was worse than it's ever been. I think I was in a pretty good mental health space before I started my own business. And then just the pressure of running it, of wanting it to succeed, it meant that I was in therapy once a week for the past 5 years and could not go without, and, you know, have had a recurring mental break every December 22nd for the first 3 years. And really had to take stock and be like, this can't keep happening. And you cannot live your life this way. It's not worthwhile. And for us, actually, PPP and EIDL was a game changer, where up until EIDL showed up, which was the economic impact disaster loan, nobody was willing to invest in us, right? Banks would never give me any money. I didn't have anybody to go to for cash like that. And EIDL gave us a pretty big chunk of cash last year. And I think that allowed me to hire for the first time and like make that transition from solopreneur to bringing in help and bringing in people who could help. And that was a game changer, where suddenly I didn't have to be on all the time because other people could take over. And I felt a lot of people cautioned against, oh, you have to worry about like not wanting to control everything and giving over control. And I think I internalized that very early on, where I was like, I will not control everything. I will give you the manual and you can go do it. And it's remarkable now that a year later, we're a team of 16 and everybody's very clear in their roles. My role is very clear. So I think it's possible. I think we're also realizing that, you know, Iceland is doing a 4-day work week. There are people who have like unlimited PTO. I think people are post-pandemic realizing that the old model of working is not sustainable. And like most tech companies are having some kind of reckoning, you know, or some kind of drama about how their people don't want to come back. So I think we're currently in the midst of this like big rebuilding of how we work. And I think it's exciting.
And that was actually the perfect segue into my next question, which is basically, you know, have you or your employees faced mental health challenges?
Absolutely. I was having this conversation with someone yesterday. We had one of our first photo shoots in one of our hair color bars yesterday. So it's an exciting moment to actually see other human beings and interact, all tested, all the protocols, all masked and things like that, except when we were getting photographed. I was mentioning this to somebody that early in the pandemic, we made a decision as a company to effectively offer mental health services on an anonymous basis, as well as, you know, traditional, what I'd call sort of Western medicine services. You know, we were able to give each of our team members access to One Medical as a free resource. And I was, on a side note, I was shocked about the number of folks, even in the pandemic, that didn't have doctors, which is curious to think about, but it's absolutely true. And so we decided to add on mental health services and had a partnership with a company called Talkspace, terrific company, fully anonymous. And I was absolutely blown away, again, anonymous. So we don't look at anything by people's names or who uses it, but on a percentage basis, there have been times in the company that more than 60% of our team members have used mental health services. So if we don't believe it's real, it's real. And we've gotten a lot of feedback about how great that's been to manage the stress and the anxiety and the competing priorities. It appears that coming into this school year, things are slightly better because the kids aren't home, but there is long-term fatigue of this event, right? It's not like everything in the world is back to normal. And I think it's created what is next, right? What's the future uncertainty that we're all, trying to make sense of what's happened. So we've been happy that we've had the good fortune of doing that. We don't intend to take it away. As far as my own mental health, sure, I've had a ton of anxiety, a ton of uncertainty, as I said, I have some coping mechanisms and intentions that's kept me feeling pretty balanced.
It's not a surprise that the mental health is a big issue in the restaurant business. And for us, I mean, for myself, I'll speak for myself. I've been in therapy for years, and yeah, the pressure is a lot, and you need support. I have a support team around me. I have to maintain my mental health. I mean, I have a team of people. I go to an acupuncturist. I go to chiropractors. I go to therapy. I go to, I make sure I try to work out, which hasn't been working out lately. But, all of these things, like, I feel like, I have to have that to keep my focus and to keep my mental health strong, so that I can be the leader that I need to be. It's a hard road, there's a lot of pressure. So yeah, there's that. And then I have seen definitely with COVID a lot more openness in the community and in my company about people with mental health issues. We do a lot of paid time off. We offer a lot of benefits at JL Restaurant Group. So we give people counseling options if they need it, and it has come up. So yeah, it's stressful work. There's no question about it. There's no getting around it. But it's also passionate work. So and it's an art. It's a creative business, and so you usually get people that are a little bit more tend to be a little bit more not unstable, but just the creative mind. I don't want to say that, but it's sometimes the restaurant business is just thrown together with a bunch of misfits and trying to make their way, and so of course you're going to get a little craziness here and there.
Okay, and last but not least, what advice do you have for women of color, and the LGBTQ plus community who may be ready to forge a path of their own?
I'm going to say something that might seem trivial or very classic advice, but I do believe following your heart and finding your genius is the key. I think that many of us coming up through any educational system have been taught that we're supposed to be great at everything. And that is a complete and total misconception that most people have. And so, for instance, somebody like myself learned very early that I needed to surround myself with people that were good at the things I was not good at. And that has led me to understand the kinds of roles that I should and shouldn't be in. So my advice first to anybody or everyone is to find what those things are that make you feel joyful, that you feel like it's flowing through you effortlessly. And it's that zone of genius, not just zone of competence, but zone of genius. Now, why do I say that? I say it because I often think that people get very caught up in, I must start a business, I must do this, I must do that, because, that seems to be for most people the path that many folks want to take. And the answer that I have to that is that's awesome if that's what you really believe your zone of genius is. If what you believe your zone of genius is, other things, then you should do those, because I do believe there are ways for women and diverse, communities to get fundraising. I don't believe it's impossible. I mean, I'm an out gay person, who's had the good fortune of getting funding and starting businesses. And I am sure along the path that those were obstacles behind closed doors. I am completely positive that that happened, and I don't care. I didn't care. What I cared about was kind of being ruthlessly focused on pursuing those dreams and finding a way to show the business competence and the ability that I could create a team to make things happen. So this is a long-winded way of saying is like, start with what makes you happy, what makes you feel like you're in your full self. And I think once you can do that, I do believe that the universe creates opportunities for you to pursue that. But often I see with people, there's a I'm supposed to or I should. And that really isn't the key to finding that space in life. So there's lots of great networks out there for fundraising. There's lots of great mentor programs. There's lots of continued and growing support. Is it totally equal and inclusive? No. But do I believe that we need to fight the fight? And do I also believe that folks like myself and others that have had the good fortune need to mentor, and much like we stood on the shoulders of other folks that helped us, we need to do the same thing. So I'm hopeful for the future, cautiously.
Absolutely. Well, that brings us to the end of this conversation. Thank you so much to our panelists who joined us today, and thank you to all of our viewers. Take care.
To wrap up today's conversation, I have the honor of speaking with Arlan Hamilton, who is the founder and managing partner of Backstage Capital, a fund that's dedicated to minimizing funding disparities in tech by investing in high potential founders who are people of color, women, and LGBTQ+. She is also the author of It's About Damn Time: How to Turn Being Underestimated into Your Greatest Advantage. Arlan has also been a financial supporter of the 19th. All right, Arlan, we are thrilled to have you here. You have really an extraordinary and inspiring story that starts in my home state of Texas. You were working your way up on the production side of live concerts, self-taught in that regard, and you decided like somehow, some way that you wanted to start a venture capital fund. So tell me why, and also how does someone who isn't from that world suddenly decide they want to be part of that world?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm part of it now, but I did grow up in Texas. I was in Texas, but on the road working with live musicians. I kind of reached a dream of mine since I was a teenager of working on the road with musicians. Some of them were, quite well known, and working on the production side of things. And I started learning more and more about Silicon Valley and startups just through hearing things and kind of hearing those words. Just like right now we're hearing NFTs, and sometimes we listen, sometimes we don't. And I just became enamored with the whole idea of it, because I felt like I was recognizing myself for the second time, coming out for the second time of, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. That's what this feeling is. This is what, drives me to start these moonshot ideas and go for things, even without a lot of stability around me. And the more I learned about that, the more I was interested, but I also learned the not so great side about venture funding, about the innovative capital, so-called, that's supposed to kick things off for a lot of these companies, was mostly going to white men, by and large, more than 90%. In a country where they make up only a third of the demographics. And so that just kind of caught me, first as a gay Black woman, yes, but also just as someone who used to play Monopoly and drive people crazy, wanting to play that game and learning about all these titans of industry and Richard Branson and Bill Gates and the Steve Jobs and all that. It just seemed to me, well, this seems like an opportunity that's being missed. And so combined thoughts led me to seeing if I could potentially raise some capital, invest that capital. Instead of going after a specific company, I would invest the capital. The founders who are underrepresented would be my customer, and the product would be capital and resources.
Amazing. Totally, totally inspiring. I mean, you didn't have a college degree. You were not like rubbing elbows with rich people. At the time that you started pitching Backstage Capital to investors, you said you were like schlepping around a backpack, basically sleeping in people's cars. You've also said that, you certainly didn't Some of them, yeah. You certainly didn't reflect most venture capitalists who are, white cisgender men. What was that road like trying to raise your first fund, to do your first raise, and making the case that you were making?
I mean, it was almost impossible. It's movie worthy. I'll say that. It was.
Who has the rights? That's a great movie.
I own the rights, by the way.
Awesome.
I didn't for 2 years, and now I do again. But that's what it's about. It's about ownership. So it was tough. I was personally living in poverty, and I had no money to speak of, and figuring out day to day where I was going to sleep, where I was going to eat. How I was going to move forward in life, and at the same time, I'm walking around telling people that I'm trying to raise multi-million-dollar funds to invest in founders, and so the things didn't really match up. But for me, it was the most sane thing in the world, because I absolutely knew what I needed to do and where I needed to go. I didn't know how long it would take, and I didn't know exactly the path. But I knew that Backstage Capital, my venture fund, needed to exist. I knew that the founders were out there creating all these companies. A lot of money was being left on the table. A lot of insults were being thrown, overtly or not. And I knew that there would come a time when the world would catch up to that. And I didn't want to be flat-footed when it did. I wanted to be ahead of the curve. And so it was going around to all these rich people essentially and saying, hey, nobody talks about this right now, in public, but how, imagine a world where it's important whether you have diversity at your company. Imagine a world where it's important who's backing whom, and people write about that and talk about it out loud. Don't you want to be on the good side of that? And they were like, oh, that's crazy. That's nonsense. And then today, we're very different than it was 6 years ago. But a few people did figure it out, and a few people did say yes. And that's how I was able to build one person at a time, build up upon that.
Awesome. I mean, so as you've said, Backstage Capital focuses on funding startups run by people of color, by women, by queer people, by people who didn't grow up in and around this game. These are people who are probably seen as, risky to those same traditional VCs we were just talking about, the ones you said who give 90% of their own funding to other white men. But you knew something they didn't. I mean, how do you see those founders as opportunities in ways that previous venture capitalists have not?
I mean, you and I are living proof of it. We both had a vision of something, and we've created it, and we've gotten here, and it wasn't easy. But we didn't stop halfway through, because I imagine, if I speak, not to speak for you, but I imagine we've both been through things before that kind of set us up for being able to handle rejection, being able to see around corners, et cetera. So imagine you're surrounded by that on a daily basis, you're seeing that everywhere you go. My reality was not the default of seeing white men succeeding only. Fortunately, I didn't have the affliction of growing up in a world where white men were default. I grew up in a world where it was very diverse, and you found talent so many different places. You found possibilities and potential in so many different unforeseen places. And on top of that, I feel like I'm someone who can spot that really early. Sort of like a Simon Cowell, I like to think of myself, but for tech and for innovation. And the people were already proving themselves over and over. I didn't create this in a lab. I just opened my eyes and looked around and observed it and said, why isn't anyone else, by and large at scale, looking at these companies and giving them a chance? Just like if you look at Y Combinator 15 years ago, that has born Airbnb, Dropbox, and like multiple unicorns, billion-dollar companies. 15 years ago, 16 years ago, there were just a few guys with hoodies eating chili that Paul Graham created for, that he cooked up for them in some room. And imagine if he didn't have that. And I'm not going to sit here and like boast about Paul Graham, because he and I do not get along. But imagine if he just said, well, they don't look like superstars. They don't look like the next tech titans of the world. So we're out of here. He had a little bit of imagination, and that's all I'm doing here.
Well, I'll ask you about not getting along in our next conversation. Say that one.
Happy to talk about it.
So obviously you've clearly been a huge success. I mean, the last stats I saw are that you've raised $20 million, funded 200 companies since your 2015 launch. That is amazing. And now you're working to raise another $30 million to more than double your current investment in startups led by people of color. I mean, talk about that success story. Look, I know a little something about what it's like to raise money, not even remotely on this scale. I mean, talk about how you're thinking about the investments that you're making and what you're able to do now that you've had this first initial big raise and you're heading into the second.
Yeah, the 20 million is over like several different funds over 6 years, every single year, not knowing if we're going to make it. Like it's really, it's kind of like funny to look back on it. But what I think changed things in more recent times is we had this groundbreaking $5 million crowd raise that went towards our runway and debt. And for so many years, we were like, day to day, just kind of like I was before, but in a different scale. And we were always somehow able to put together 30 or so investments in companies every single year, regardless of that. And so it has just been this day to day slog. It's kind of funny, like looking back on old videos that we took, because we documented a lot, old podcast episodes, and being like, we reached 10 investments. We raised, $700,000. Can you believe that? Look at where we come from. When you come from 0 to 700,000, that's an amazing amount. So I never take that for granted. And I think that we still have so much to go. I think people are going to be surprised by the exponential growth, both in our assets under management and in just the impact that we have and will have over time, because if the first 6 years are any indication, we haven't seen anything yet.
Amazing. Well, raising money can feel impossible, speaking from experience, and it can feel completely daunting to know where to begin. It's especially intimidating if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, if you're queer, if you're multiple of those, and if you don't have the kind of privilege that gives you sort of that massive leg up of even knowing where to begin. So what do you tell people who have an idea, who want to build something, but who have absolutely no idea how to even begin to access capital? Like, where does someone...
Oh, I love that question. You know why I love that question so much right now? It's because I have just launched a company that I'm bootstrapping. And I think it's interesting, like, people are kind of bucking against that. And some people are like, well, how are you calling it bootstrapping if you have a fund behind you? I'm not taking any money from the fund. I'm not taking any money from outside sources. I am taking the revenue from the company and putting it back into the company. And it's not the easiest thing in the world, but I think it's like, I think the bottom line is that we have more control than what we think we do when we start out. So a lot of people, and I meet them, and I was them, we think that we have to start out the gate with some outside help or some outside figure deciding whether or not we are worthy of capital. And we spend, I think, an outsized amount of time and energy on trying to raise money that we could spend on generating revenue and earning that money. And so I've spent the last few weeks like really reveling in this idea of like putting all my sales and negotiation talent towards getting customers has been so refreshing and so fun, versus using all of that to get one more no from another investor. Because as an investor, I have to go out every single year and raise money from institutions usually, and it's just soul sucking. So I think, if you think about it, like, let me focus on my customer, focus on my product, focus on sales, and then people will come to me. That's one way of looking at it. It's not the only way. It's a really interesting tack that a lot of people don't think of first. And I'll have to say that there have been investors who have already, just in the last month or so, reached out and said, can we invest in your new company? And isn't it true, when you're not looking, that's when they come to you.
Tell us a little bit about your new company, which sounds totally awesome.
Oh, cool. Yeah, my company's called Runner. It was incubated at Backstage, meaning that I was working at Backstage and I thought of it because I needed an EA. I needed an EA 2017. It was very hard to find. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if somebody could just help me plug in an EA, but that they had already vetted, but then I could hire them full time eventually at some point if I couldn't afford it at the beginning. So we do fractional, we match you with fractional and temp to hire operations talent for inclusive startups. So let's say it's 1 to 200 current employees is our sweet spot. So let's say you're a solopreneur, or you have 6 people at your company or 20 people at your company. You may not think that you can afford or even think about looking for an executive assistant or even a COO or an HR rep. Today, you were going to wait until you get bigger, but those roles are really important today, especially those people ops HR roles. And so we provide vetted fractional help there. And on top of that, we're helping people understand just how valuable it is to take a lot of things off of the CEO's plate, off of the founder's plate, and open up that lane for you to do what I just talked about, which is, what if you had 40 more hours of time a month that you could spend not working on emails, not working on scheduling, not working on research, but instead working on, let me have conversations with my potential customers, let me talk to my current customers and see what we could be doing better, et cetera, focusing on your zone of genius rather than trying to remember to eat, which I have a hard time doing.
This sounds like a good sales pitch, actually. I may want to reach out to you later to talk about this.
We'd love to have you.
I know. So when you make decisions on where to invest, like, talk a little bit about what you're looking for. Like, how valuable is that flashy deck or the prototype? Like, how valuable is the person's identity or lived experience? Like, how?
Yeah. So we still invest. I know it's a little bit of a contradictory, but there's different places I think we can plug in some strategic capital. And especially if you're focusing on your customer, investors want to know you, want to be around you, and Backstage certainly does. I don't think, I know that a flashy deck is not important. I think having that presentation, having something that shows the problem that you're tackling, the solution that you have, the thesis sort of that you're trying to figure out, and who you are and why you're the person to do it, and you're the team to do it. I think it's table stakes, incredibly important to have that, because I'm going to need to see that. I'm get to know you in 5 minutes, essentially. But I don't think it has to be beautiful, has to be expensive. You don't have to go out and get it made. It can be really bare bones if the content of it is awesome. If what you're saying is like something I want to learn more about. And so sometimes people over-index on like presentation and the content isn't very interesting. So that means also, I don't need you to be really incredibly charming or incredibly great negotiator or great speaker even. I want to meet you where you are. I want to know if you're introverted or if you have trouble speaking publicly. I used to as well. I know that's really difficult. Let's find a different medium for you. Is it easier for you to present, online on a PDF, or to do like asynchronous sort of thing? But whatever it is you're going to send to me, please let it be really powerful, because you have this choice of when you're going to present something to someone and asking them for their money at the beginning. They have the leverage if they have the money at the beginning. So I would say, don't go out there until you've practiced with your friends, you've gotten some feedback, you've talked to somebody who is kind of grumpy, who can tell you, like, who gives it to you like it is, all of that, and then present, and don't let anybody's no stop you.
That's great. And how do you measure success? Is obviously, everybody's in this to make money, right? Like, so at the end of the day, is that the only thing that matters, how financially successful the companies you invest in is, or is there sort of a mission-driven aspect to this too?
I think it's definitely both. We at Backstage, it's very important that we're a for-profit sort of Sharky institution, because there are so many nonprofits that are in our lane, and we wanted to kind of set ourselves apart, and that's just part of our thesis. But as humans, we want things that are going to make an impact. And so if we can make an impact on those who are making impact, that's just like incredible. You can't even measure that. And also, you don't have to come to us because we're like pre-seed and seed. You don't have to come to us already making hand over fist. But if you can show some sort of evidence of like, hey, if we only had a little bit more resources, what can we do? Because check out what we've already done. You have this waiting list that's thousands long because you were able to do a lot of clever things that didn't cost a lot of money. Or your product is something that people who have used it, they come back over and over and over again. And they're just like, I just need you to be closer to me. I need you to have more access. I need you to have more, this and that. Those types of things are really interesting. And for me personally, the way I measure it is I say, if or I think to myself, is this something that I could do if only I had 10 years and some time to do it? Or would it take me more than a decade to crack what you're doing? If it would take me more than a decade to crack what you're doing, you have my undivided attention, because that makes it possible for me to live vicariously through you and to have impact that I cannot measure, which is on a good scale, right? It breaks the scale, which is really, really profound to me as someone who, hit 40 and is thinking about like what happens over the next few decades of my life.
I just crossed that mark myself. So lots of that soul searching. All right. So I have to ask before we wrap up, you're from Texas, obviously a state that's very much in the headlines right now for its abortion restrictions, for anti-trans legislation. It also has a very active founder community, and particularly in Austin, where I'm based. How do you think about the role of founders and of VCs who work with them when it comes to being a corporate citizen, when it comes to engaging with the communities that they're based in? How do you all think about that?
I mean, I think it's just really important on all sides. I've been thinking a lot about courage recently. I think that there are some major players in the country and in Texas who have been completely silent about things. And it's so much, I don't know if I want to say easier, but they have such a platform where they could make things happen. And the little guy, quote unquote, it's harder for them. They get more one-on-one flack for it, but they take those risks, and that's really impressive to me. So I've been thinking about courage because I think it kind of boils down to there's not a lot of courage in business. There's some, and I'm drawn to that. But I think it's all of our business, and it's all of our duties to be an active voice, to stand out. I know what it's like to be outspoken. I know what it's like to put yourself on the line, to think that maybe I'm going to lose out on something, or maybe I'm going to affect other people in a negative way. There's integrity, and there is conscience, and there's courage, and everybody has the ability to tap into all three of those things. And it's your choice whether or not you do that. I think you should.
Wonderful. Well, Arlan, thank you so much for your courage over the course of your career today. Thank you for your support for the 19th. And thank you so much for being with us today. Appreciate you.
Thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Arlan, and everyone who joined us today. And a special thank you to our sponsor, MasterCard, for making this event possible. We hope you'll join us in November for our next Live with the 19th event, where we'll look into the changing landscape of gender diversity in the military. If you want to be among the first to hear details about our events, sign up now for our free newsletter at 19thnews.org/subscribe. And a final thanks to the thousands of members who support our nonprofit newsroom. Your contributions truly make conversations like today's possible. If you're not a member yet, you can show your support today by donating at 19thnews.org/membership. We look forward to welcoming you to the 19th family, and we will see you at our next event.